Hello everyone, welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel, your daily briefing on the fighting on the Ukrainian front. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It really helps support the channel and keep these daily briefings coming. Let's start with the Odesa region, since a lot of news is coming out of there. Over the past 24 hours, Russian forces struck the city with cruise missiles and drones, hitting energy infrastructure, ships and bridges. A significant share of cargo from Romania moves through the bridge over the Dniester estuary and through Moldovan territory, since that's the shortest route. It has now been reported that the bridge near the settlement of Mayaki has again been struck and closed for some time. As far as I know, it has not been destroyed, only damaged. Overall, the Russian army appears to be trying to cut off the southern part of Odesa region from the rest of the country, since this bridge is a key link carrying traffic to and from other countries. There is now visible damage from the strike. A hole has appeared in the bridge, and it's likely a follow-up strike will be needed, otherwise the bridge could be repaired within a couple of days. Now let's move to the Kostiantynivka direction, where there is important news. Russian forces have entered the small neighboring settlement of Izhevsk. Russian infantry is reported to have already taken control of about half of it. Overall, Russian forces are expanding their breakthrough toward Oleksivo-Druzhkivka. These small settlements located east of the larger cities also need to be taken, so infantry can be moved from there toward the main direction, toward Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. The Russian grouping fighting in this direction reports that the advance is proceeding successfully. Russian forces continue building up strength in the northern part of the city for attacks on Oleksivo-Druzhkivka. Overall, things are going well here, regardless of how much the Ukrainian side tries to project the appearance of having everything under control. We have repeatedly received footage from the northern part of Kostiantynivka. Oleksivo-Druzhkivka is also being hit with a large number of glide bombs and drones. How successfully Ukrainian defenses and FPV operators can be suppressed there will largely determine the overall outcome. Slightly to the west, from the Torsky bridgehead, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported today that Russian forces have taken full control of the settlement of Torsky. On the map, it is still marked as a grey zone, but in reality the settlement has already been taken by the Russian side. Now we're waiting for a push toward the next settlements, Petrivka and Raiske. Russian forces have one final push left to make here, and there is a strong likelihood that an entry into this settlement from the west could happen even before Russian forces take Oleksivo-Druzhkivka and move into Druzhkivka itself from there. From the Kharkiv area, there is also news, mostly from the north, where the AFU, despite having redeployed reserves, continue to lose ground. In particular, fighting for Ivanivka in Kharkiv region has concluded. This is a medium-sized village, home to just over 500 people before the war. The fighting for Ivanivka lasted a little over 2 weeks. It began on July 23rd and ended yesterday, August 8th. The village is now under Russian control. Along with the conclusion of the fighting for Ivanivka, fighting has begun for the neighboring village of Vasilivka. So far, Russian forces are holding on to the western outskirts of the village. Vasilivka is comparable in size to Ivanivka, but the real significance here isn't about size. It's about the continued movement toward linking up with units currently fighting in the Veliki Burluk direction. That is, from the opposite side. In effect, only 4 small settlements now separate Russian forces from linking up, and from encircling hundreds of AFU personnel in the areas to the north. That's the village of Vasilivka itself, where fighting has already begun, with a pre-war population of 480, then Blahodatne, with a pre-war population of under 200, Nefedivka, with a pre-war population of 130, and Chorn, with a pre-war population of 450. So the only settlements of any real size here are Vasilivka, where fighting has already begun, and Chorn on the eastern flank. In between are small hamlets. Let's measure the distance. If we place a point at Vasilivka and another at the tree line west of Ivashchenkove, we get less than 15 kilometers. That means each side needs to cover about 7.5 kilometers, and everything to the north would fall into a pocket. That's an area of over 300 square kilometers, 24 settlements, and several hundred AFU personnel. No withdrawal order has been given to them so far. On the contrary, as I've mentioned before, Colombian mercenaries have been redeployed to this sector. So the AFU's task is to prevent the pocket from closing and, where possible, to counterattack. The counterattacks, however, have not been going well. Yesterday, it was reported that fighting is now underway on the approaches to Petropavlivka, a village south of Bilyi Kolodiaz. It was actually from Petropavlivka that Colombian mercenaries first tried to push toward Bilyi Kolodiaz on the very first day they were deployed here. I told you about that at the time. Back then, they were routed on the approaches to Bilyi Kolodiaz, and now fighting is underway on the approaches to Petropavlivka itself. If we look at the map of fortifications, we can see that the next defensive line lies well to the south of Petropavlivka. That means these settlements, Petropavlivka, Anopil, Kotivka, Harbuzivka, are unfortified, sitting between defensive lines, and are likely to fall fairly quickly. Further on, though, it will get harder. There was also an expected piece of news yesterday. After the capture of Anishchin, fighting began for Vodiane. This isn't really new, I mentioned it in yesterday's episode, but it has now been confirmed by the official channel of the North grouping that fighting for Vodiane has indeed begun. That covers the northern sector overall. As you can see, despite the additional forces redeployed there, AFU command has so far been unable to fully stabilize the situation. The partial encirclement is tightening. The pincers are drawing closer together. It's unlikely the pocket will be closed in August, but it's quite plausible by September. That said, as we discussed, only 4 settlements remain, so it's possible the North grouping could manage it by the end of August. We'll see. A few more advances over the past 24 hours. The Russian East grouping continues applying pressure north of Novoselivka and Huliai-Pilske, with strikes ongoing against tree lines and AFU strongpoints. No news has come in yet from the Lyubitska area. The East grouping typically doesn't comment on small advances and instead announces the capture of a settlement outright once it's taken. No new data has come in yet from the Kyiv front, but as a reminder for viewers, fighting in Mala Tokmachka is nearing its conclusion, and the settlement should soon come under full control. The Russian side may not announce the capture ahead of time, since the matter of Kyiv itself could potentially be resolved at the same time, avoiding drawing too much attention from Ukrainian command to this area. We're waiting for further information from this sector. On the Dobropilia sector, I mentioned yesterday that positive news was coming in for the Russian side. Russian forces have finally broken into the settlement itself, and fierce fighting is underway inside the town. The town had a pre-war population of around 28,000, a fairly sizable settlement, roughly half the size of Kostiantynivka. On the Ukrainian side, fighting continues in Rodinske. As I mentioned, there are still AFU troops in the area of Rodinska, Svitla, and Belitska, but these are isolated groups operating behind the front line, supplied by drones. Russian troops are trying to track the supply drones in order to locate where AFU personnel are hiding. Now let's move to the Borova direction, which we haven't covered in a while. Red Kodub has come back under AFU control, but everything to the south remains under Russian control. The settlement of Nov remains under Russian control. Although the Ukrainian side has tried to claim it was taken, in reality nothing has changed there, and it remains under Russian army control. There's no news yet from the Kupiansk front, but there will be soon, and we'll go through this sector in detail, because the map here doesn't match reality. The front remains dynamic, and the map simply isn't being updated in time. That's the frontline news for today. The Sumy direction is also quiet, with no advances observed so far. Now let's turn briefly to the political situation and the news agenda, since politics also plays an important role in this war. Through the naval blockade of the ports of Greater Odesa and the air campaign against logistics in Odesa region, Russia has managed to put the opposing side in a catastrophic position. It also became known today that Russian forces struck a ship leaving the Danube for the Black Sea, meaning the Russian army is now effectively blocking Danube shipping as well. The peak of the problems for Ukraine will come at the end of this year, when all of these measures will be combined with large-scale strikes on what remains of Ukraine's energy infrastructure over the winter period. That is where the real chance lies to break Ukraine's economy and make it impossible for it to continue waging the war. And it is precisely this chance that attempts are now being made to deny Russia, by proposing to unblock Ukrainian ports, allow Ukrainian maritime exports to resume, and restore a broad flow of weapons deliveries for the AFU by sea. The new grain deal is an attempt to prolong the military conflict in the hope that the Russian economy will crumble, triggering domestic political instability. If Moscow agrees to a maritime truce, it will create for itself a colossal number of problems that it may well not be able to successfully resolve. That is why continuing the current strategy in the Ukrainian conflict is of vital importance for Russia. This war needs to be ended on the battlefield, and the time for diplomacy will come later, when it becomes necessary to negotiate a new security architecture for Europe. But before those negotiations can begin, the presence of the current Ukrainian regime on Europe's political map must be entirely removed from the equation. Is authorized to report that Donald Trump's chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law Jared Kushner intend to travel to Kyiv and Moscow. The purpose of this visit isn't entirely clear, unless it's to ask why Washington proved unable to make Zelensky comply with the terms of a peace settlement that had been agreed with Russia at the Anchorage summit. But the answer to that is already more than obvious. The United States never intended to honor the gentleman's agreement reached in Alaska. They were simply buying time to prepare the AFU for long-range strikes on Russian territory. That bet, however, has failed spectacularly. Russia responded with a naval blockade of the ports of Greater Odesa and an escalation of the infrastructure war, which, given Ukraine's shortage of air defense missiles, has led to grim consequences for it. So Kyiv again needs breathing room, and Witkoff and Kushner are once again heading to Moscow to conduct diplomatic camouflage. It's worth wondering whether they'll be believed again. The previous round of trust cost Russia dearly. The next one could cost even more. That said, some fallback conditions could be proposed to the American side for it to be accepted as a mediator. First, a full ban on the re-export of American weapons to Ukraine. Second, shutting down Starlink over Ukrainian territory. Third, an end to the transfer of intelligence to Kyiv. Without this, there is no point even starting a dialogue with Trump's emissaries, and it should no longer proceed on the terms set in Anchorage. After everything that has happened since, those terms need to be significantly toughened. If Moscow now again agrees to some quiet understandings and slows the pace of the infrastructure war, which Witkoff and Kushner will be pushing hard for, or abandons the naval blockade of Odesa, Turkey already proposed this yesterday, it will effectively be shooting itself in the foot, possibly in both feet. The war in Ukraine is approaching a decisive moment, one where Russia could break the opposing side, and its leadership will be pressured with everything available to once again trust the process and ease up. Before we go, one more item just in. Footage has appeared showing a fire at a Saudi Arabian oil refinery following a reported Houthi strike. Details are still limited and unconfirmed at this stage, but will bring you more as the picture becomes clearer. This ties directly into the broader picture we've been tracking around the Strait of Hormuz and regional oil infrastructure. That's all for today's briefing. Thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.